Hello, it's Season 12, Episode 36 of the Ubuntu podcast, perhaps the last one ever. My name's Alan, and joining me today is Martin. Hello, Martin, how are you?
I'm very well, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. No Mark again this week, it's just the two of us for this last one ever for this year. And in this episode, we're going to have a discussion about what makes Ubuntu. How does Ubuntu manifest itself? And we'll also have a little bit of feedback and then say goodbye forever, or maybe not. So, Martin, what have you been up to?
Well, I have been making a low latency point-to-point game streaming application.
What? You made Google Stadia?
Yeah, I did. And much better than Google Stadia or Steam can do it, I would hasten to add.
And you've written it in Bash?
Yes, of course. Anyone that went to Foss Talk Live earlier this year will know that my Bash skills are legendary, and therefore, clearly, this is an application you can implement in Bash.
Right, so let's take a step back. Why did you create a, as you call it, point-to-point game streaming application? What was the motivation here?
We're creating a new project, aren't we?
Yes, we wanted to play some games.
You and I wanted to rekindle our school ground arguments about which is best, the ZX Spectrum or obviously the Commodore 64, which is better in every single way imaginable. No debate. So in order to do that, we are going to create some live streams where we have these comparisons and battles of the two platforms. But in order to do that, we needed to be able to see and play games remotely from one another, but in real time.
And so everyone is saying, yeah, but you could just share your screen. Why can't you just use Skype or Talkie or Discord or any one of the other 1,000 ways to share that window to the other person?
Because the latency is terrible.
And so what, when I'm playing a game and I die, you'll see it like 3 seconds later?
Yes, many seconds later. And what we wanted to do is we want to stream all of this. So one of us has to be like stream controller and have all of this stuff coming in one place and then stream that out to, the wider internet. But what we see and do, the two of us, needs to be happening, in real time, less than half a second apart. So we tried lots of things, didn't we? We tried Discord.
We tried them all.
Yeah, we tried the new Steam thing, which doesn't work because what we're doing is not Steam games. We tried a thing called Parsec, which, oh my goodness, shudders, required us to run Windows. Of all things, Windows in the cloud. Can you imagine that? We were spinning up Windows instances in the cloud. So we tried all manner of things. And in the end, we decided we knew best. So we designed and wrote our own application to do it.
And so this enables one of us to stream to the internet, both of us playing games, like taking it in turns to play games. And this we will do sometime once we've got all the kinks ironed out. And I guess we'll post a link somewhere and share it on our Twitters and stuff.
This little project is called 8-Bit Verses. We have a website, all lowercase, numeric 8bitverses.com.
You realise how terrible the website is when you have to describe how to type it in.
Yeah, I realise that now, but it doesn't matter.
So we'll just put a link in the show notes.
You can find all of the places you can follow along, including Twitch and YouTube when we actually start doing this for reals, and a link to our GitHub repository where this low latency point-to-point game streaming application implemented in Bash lives, which also, by the way, uses GPU and IGP encoding should you want it to. We'll be sure to tell everyone that we're doing it.
Oh, God, yeah. Right, let's get on with this show, the last show. in the last episode, we mentioned a couple of derivative distros of Ubuntu that have had releases, prominent releases in the last couple of weeks or coming weeks. And if you've ever seen one of these lists of Linux distributions, you'll notice that there's quite a lot of distributions that base themselves on Ubuntu. And there's a good reason for that. And there's a good reason why the stuff that's done by Canonical and Ubuntu is the kind of thing you might want to build a distro on. But I think most people don't know what Canonical and the Ubuntu project does, what actually happens in between one release coming out and the next release. And so I thought, let's go through some of that stuff, because it might be interesting for people to think about when they're using either Ubuntu or some other Ubuntu related distro, to think about the pieces and how they got there.
Indeed.
So at a ones and zeros level, what is Ubuntu?
Well, it's a Linux distribution that includes a kernel and a bunch of packages and, in some cases, desktops environments.
And people get that as an ISO image, typically.
Yes, which is strange, given that I don't have any CD-ROMs or DVDs anymore in my life. But yes, it's an image that you put on some kind of media, optical or solid state, and then you install it on your computer.
Right. And everyone knows, I think, that it is based on Debian.
Yes.
But what does that mean? The Debian developers do a lot of work, and that results in something that we consume. What is it that we're consuming?
So Debian packages are obviously distributed in a way that means you can build them from source. So we don't just take the debs, the binary components from the Debian archive. We ingest the source packages and we recompile those in the Ubuntu infrastructure and run those against all of our unit tests and package tests and security compliance tests. And those packages only make their way into Ubuntu when they've satisfied all of those requirements.
Okay, so that's one difference between Ubuntu and some distros, some Debian-based distros. Some, like Raspbian, for example, uses the Debian archive, or does Raspbian have their own archive?
It's a bit of both. So they kind of ingest the Debian archive, but then not everything in Raspbian is a source package. They have some just binary-only packages in there as well.
Whereas Linux Mint point their users at the Ubuntu archive, but add an additional archive on top for all their Linux Mint specific stuff. And similarly, Elementary point to the Ubuntu archive and have their own repositories on top.
As do Zorin and as do System76 with Pop! OS.
Right. And that's how they build their uniqueness on top, is they build against a bunch of packages that were built and hosted in the Ubuntu archive. Okay. Every 6 months, a new release of Ubuntu comes out and a whole bunch of stuff has to happen. As soon as the new code name is announced, stuff happens.
Right.
What is that stuff that happens that gets us on the road towards the new release?
Well, after the planning has happened, there's a few things that happen. First of all, somebody has to decide, and I say somebody has to decide what the code name is going to be.
Right. And that's always Mark.
It is, well, generally speaking, it is, although I have heard recently that maybe some other people have been sort of coercing Mark's decision internally, yes.
Right. But typically, publicly, Mark decides, and some configuration is done. So some sysadmins and release managers press some buttons in Launchpad and run some script somewhere, and it opens the archive. And as soon as the archive is opened, there's nothing in it, right? You couldn't upgrade to it because there's nothing there. There's no packages, right?
Yes. Let's say yes for simplicity. Yeah.
Well, on day one, there's nothing in it, right?
Right. So then what happens?
So then there is a small set of archive admins who push some of the initial packages into the archive. And these are like low-level stuff like the GCC compiler and libc and binutils and some real low-level stuff. Yeah, you don't start the archive by pushing Xorg or Firefox directly into the archive. You start with the lower-level stuff and then build up from there.
That's interesting because How does that stuff work without a kernel? Surely somebody has to push a kernel in there.
No, because the Launchpad builders don't run the release that they're building.
Ah, I see.
So you build on an older release. I think the builders are running the LTS release. So releases that come after the LTS are built on the LTS. And so, no, it's not the Bootstrap problem where you have to, manually build a compiler out of manual ones and zeros and pieces of paper in order to get a compiler, in order to build your compiler. You already have the tools. But later on in the cycle, a bit further down, everything is rebuilt again. So they do periodically rebuild everything. But initially there's like nothing in there, and it slowly builds up. And at that point, once the archive opens, people who are responsible for various packages will have been waiting for the archive to open and can start pushing them into the archive. And at this point, you still don't even have an ISO image. You can't build an ISO because you haven't got half the packages that are there. And so at the start of the release, start of the release cycle, the developers are all eager to get their packages in, because if they don't get their packages in, the ISO is not going to get built, and they can't do any testing, and they can't upgrade to the new release. So there's a whole flood of packages that land in the archive within the first month.
And in the case of a Focal Fossa, which will become the 2004 LTS, I think it was about a 2.5 week period before anyone, outside of the canonical archive admins could really push anything into that archive, because there was a whole bunch of transitions of sort of foundational technologies that were being updated, and all of that work needed to be done first before anyone else can start uploading, their desktop environments. Like Rick Mills is a prolific uploader of stuff, but he wasn't able to do that until a couple of weeks in.
And there's all these intricate dependencies on, you can't build this until that's built. And so I think Matthias Close is usually the guy who publishes the early packages. So there's a mailing list called Focal Changes. There's a mailing list that's created for each release. And it's quite interesting to follow, because you get to see when each package and each version was pushed to the archive. And so the very first one that was pushed was base files. And then the very next thing that gets added is Perl. And then there's developer tools, bin utils, the Bootstrap, and all the things that you need at the super low level in order to get yourself bootstrapped to the point where you've got a release.
Yeah, anyone that's wondering why Perl is so fun, at the front of the queue, that's because the heritage of Debian, so many of its, tools and utilities for developers were implemented in Perl, decades ago, and some of that hangover still exists today. Well, not even hangover; it's fundamental to the operational of the development tools.
So, as well as those fundamental packages, there's then also a sync, what we call a sync from Debian. So we import a bunch of packages from Debian. We don't always use Debian testing or Debian SID unstable.
Well, these days, as far as I'm aware, I've only ever seen a sync from unstable, which is Debian SID.
Okay.
But syncs are interesting in themselves, because when we go back to the release that just happened, so 1910, there's a point at which we stop syncing packages from Debian, because we want to maintain some sort of stability, and we know what the state of things is. So there's many weeks where we don't ingest any new packages from Debian into Ubuntu. So when we open the floodgates, we've got weeks, sometimes months of backlog of new stuff in Debian that comes cascading in, that all needs to be built. And some of that needs some massaging in order to, build and satisfy the various dependencies and what have you.
Right. And so there's developers who are responsible for individual packages. I guess there's automated stuff that pulls stuff in from Debian, but then there's individual developers who are caring for specific packages.
Yes.
I guess in the Foundations team, and then the desktop team care for like GTK packages and other desktop related stuff, and then the individual flavors care for, you know, Qt and
their desktops
and so on.
But what's interesting is that what people may not realize is that all of those Ubuntu flavors, so Kubuntu, which is obviously KDE, Lubuntu, which is now LXQ, Ubuntu Mate, which is obviously Mate and GTK, and then Ubuntu Budgie and so on, XFCE, Ubuntu. By and large, we're uploading those new packages to Debian in order for them to sync into Ubuntu.
Right. So we're not just building stuff for Ubuntu. We encourage people to push it to Debian first, and then we get it as a byproduct of the Debian sync. But once the Debian sync is paused, we can then continue to upload into Ubuntu if necessary.
Yes. So exactly. So once we've got a freeze in place, those people that need packages, if you're in the Ubuntu project and you need packages in Ubuntu, you can override that process and you can upload directly to Ubuntu. That's not cricket. You know, that's what you do in exceptional circumstances. By and large, you upload to Debian and ingest things that way. But when you need to, you upload to Ubuntu directly.
Okay. So after a while, there are enough packages in the archive that it's possible to build an ISO image. So there's enough of the low-level stuff. There's a kernel, there's all the compiler and all the system D and desktop-related stuff. There's enough that you can make an ISO, and we start building ISOs. And we don't necessarily build all the ISOs from day one, because not all the flavors might be ready, not all the packages, and not all the packages might be integrated to work together. So it could be that something's broken and the ISO just doesn't build, right?
Yeah, you know, in that resync from Debian, it may be that there's newer stuff there, and you know, we do have exceptions in Ubuntu, so we don't just simply absorb everything from Debian into Ubuntu. In some cases, we have Ubuntu specific changes in a package, and it might be that that version of that package isn't of a sufficiently high enough revision to satisfy a build dependency for something. So we have to do the work in order to, make all of those things line up and work together.
So the ISOs are built, and people can start installing them, and some adventurous people start upgrading to the new in development release. And I say adventurous because, stuff can break now and then.
Yeah.
But at that point, we're now kind of rolling. You might consider it like a rolling release, because we're in development and we're rolling forward, and new packages are arriving every day. And if you apt upgrade every day, you'll get new debs every day.
It's just like Arch Linux at that point.
It's 6 monthly Arch. Well, it's like 4 monthly Arch Linux.
Well, no, not even, right? So, I think that you can roll on Ubuntu and Debian in the same way that you roll on Arch, right? You can, in Debian, just follow SID or testing, and in Ubuntu, you just never pin yourself to a release. You just always move to the next one. And a lot of the distro maintainers in Ubuntu, myself, Simon, Dustin, David, the other Simon, we do just roll from release to release, just like a rolling release distribution. So that does exist in Ubuntu. Just not many people realize that that's a byproduct of the way that Ubuntu is constructed, that you can do that.
And so in the 3 to 4 months that you've got left before that next release comes out, there's a bunch of stuff that happens at a high level. What happens? Like we've pulled in a whole bunch of stuff from Debian. We've got ISO images being built. What next? What happens now?
Well, so we will have already decided what new features, if we're talking about the desktop, what new features we want in the Ubuntu desktop. And that means that we're either working on features upstream and getting those packaged, as we've just explained, uploaded to Debian in order to synchronize them to Ubuntu. And, as things get close to release, then maybe just uploading to Ubuntu directly and retrospectively uploading those to Debian. Fixing bugs. I mean, the amount of work that goes into bug fixing is astonishing. If you look in the Ubuntu Desktop IRC channel on a Tuesday afternoon UK time, you will see our weekly meetings where we review all of the bugs that are release critical for all of the supported releases. And we spend an hour going through that and making sure that those bugs get resolved and fixed. And these are not like bug fixes as in there's an existing fix and we need to apply that patch. These are bugs that exist that there is no fix for, that we go and develop a fix for, fix it upstream, fix it in Debian, and then fix it in Ubuntu. There's a whole bunch of work that goes on there just around, quality and bug fixing.
Some of that will be, so you've said there's like fixing bugs, there's fixing build failures because you pulled in something new and it might fail to build. And it might not even just fail to build on AMD 64. It might fail to build on ARM-HF or on PowerPC.
Or on a mainframe.
Or on an S390X mainframe. And so in order to be cleared, it has to build on all of them, right? Most packages have to build on everything.
Yeah.
Unless they're architecture all, in which case they build on one.
Until very recently, it included, 32-bit Intel, and that's now an exception. So we're allowing build failures on that platform right now. We'll tidy that up over time.
And as well as that, and updating all the packages, there's new software that comes in as well, because when we sync from Debian, there may be new packages that come from Debian, but also new packages that come from elsewhere. Like the Ubuntu developers, there are people who create brand new whole cloth software that needs to go in the archive. Like a good example of that is Canonical Live Patch or Juju or Maz or
ZSys more recently.
Yeah, so there is software that we introduce into the archive as well. And so that needs to be done. So that's work that needs to go on in that cycle as well.
Yeah, and when you introduce new software, some of that's by osmosis. So as you step up to a new version of GNOME, that's got many moving parts. It's possible that pulls in a new library dependency. And those library dependencies, everything we ship on the ISO images for, the server and desktop, needs to be in the main archive. And if an application or a library is in the main archive, it actually means that our security team are prepared to support that. And that means that everything that's in the main archive has had manual security review. And not just they've looked at the code, but they've looked at the upstream project to make sure that it's healthy and alive and that they have well-defined processes for reporting security-related issues, and that there is a mechanism for, working with them when there's a security issue.
This differs from some other distros. I'm not pointing fingers, but some other distros, software just goes into their archive and there's no review at all.
Right.
But not every package in the Ubuntu archive gets that kind of scrutiny. You're talking about the bit that's in main, which is a subset of all the packages in the archive. And to get into main, you have to go through that security review.
Yeah. But that's a fairly exhaustive process that is valuable because it maintains the health of the base distribution, and that points to the stability and reliability of Ubuntu, because only healthy software enters into the main archive.
So as well as new software entering, there's also removing deprecated software. So sometimes software is no longer maintained upstream. The upstream doesn't care about it anymore. Maybe nobody uses it anymore. Nobody cares about it. And it might get relegated from main into universe, in which case the expectation is the community could maintain it, or it might get completely removed from the archive. And there have been occasions where you upgrade from one release of Ubuntu to the next and a piece of software disappears because nobody upstream cares about it enough to look after it. And so we shouldn't have to carry the can for it. So it gets removed from the archive.
So we've got a couple of examples like that, where at the moment, Python 2 is being moved to the Universe archive. So Nothing in Ubuntu will be shipping supporting Python 2.
Well, nothing depends on Python 2.
Nothing depends on it, yeah. And in the desktop space, in the 1910 cycle, anything Qt 4 related was removed from the archive. And some of those things don't just happen in Ubuntu. You know, we're following Debian's lead, and sometimes they're following ours. So that Qt 4 thing was, you know, harmonization that's an old technology. It needs to be removed, and, you know, some cleanup happens.
And so there's also some package cleanup, because there may be patches that we're carrying in Ubuntu that sometimes we put patches in packages so that they benefit our users, and then we submit those patches upstream, and those eventually make their way into Debian. And when we sync from Debian, those patches are integrated, and so we don't need to carry them anymore. Someone needs to do the work to clean out those old patches, I guess.
Yes, indeed. So that's down to the package maintainers, and sometimes, you know, that's our people rather than just, you know, community, you know, contributors.
At the end of all of that, and this isn't just none of these tasks are a one-time thing. This is a continuous activity throughout that 6 months. And then you get pauses every so often where there is beta testing, and then there's a release candidate, and then you get closer to the release and you decide what's going to be a blocker for the release, and whether you need to respin the ISOs. And eventually you get to the point where there's an ISO made, and that's gold, and that's the release ISO that comes out on release day. And then from that point onwards, there are updates to that release in that archive. And then we start the whole dance again for the next release.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the 1910 release, for example, the first 4 weeks of the 2004 cycle are actually looking at the bugs that have been raised by people and fixing the bugs in 1910, because obviously that lends itself to the quality of 2004 as well. Because if we fix those things in 1910 that are clearly obvious, you know, the things that have got lots of heat around them, then that improves what will become the next LTS. And, you know, GNOME have a point release. So even though we've done the release, that's not the end of it. You know, we then also rev to the next point release of GNOME in 1910, and also those fixes. And that's not just, you know, ingesting upstream into our downstream release. There's a symbiotic relationship there where we're sending fixes back upstream and they're coming back downstream. You know, there's this whole dance that happens.
That highlights another difference between Ubuntu and some of the rolling distros, is because we have multiple supported releases of Ubuntu, you've got multiple supported releases of GNOME. Just to pick one component, like GNOME, there are multiple releases of GNOME being supported in Ubuntu. And so there are maybe patches that are landing in the 2004 focal release and patches that are landing in 1910 for a completely different release of GNOME. And then all the way back to 1804 and 1604, there might be patches landing back there as well. And so the people who are doing that, it's the same people doing all of those. So those people are being spread across multiple releases of Ubuntu. And when you contrast that with a typical rolling release where there is only one gold version that's in the archive of any particular package, and you only patch that one, or maybe even don't patch that one, you just
wait for upstream.
You wait for upstream to patch it, and then you consume that. It's a very different world.
Yeah, I mean, in many cases, our security team is actually developing those fixes in the packages that go to the upstream project in order that these other rolling release distributions just absorb the new version and, you know, go on their merry way. You know, it's an interesting relationship.
It is. So at the end of all of this, a release has gone out the door. And then to go back to the beginning of the story, we've got Elementary and Mint and Zorin and all these other derivative distros of Ubuntu that are consuming that body of work and then building upon it to customize something for their user base or for their use case in whatever it might be. And I think what the users of those distros lose sight of is everything that's beneath the surface. The iceberg of the distro that they're using is the bit above the surface, and I think they miss all that bit that's below the surface. And I think it's interesting how Ubuntu is just seen as this singular thing. It's just, there's an ISO image, there's an archive, and I think what people miss is the hundreds of people who worked over the years before that ISO was built in order to get that ISO out the door.
So if we just ignore derivatives for the moment, if we just look at like the official flavors, let's talk about Ubuntu Mate. I would not have been able to produce a desktop operating system had it not been for that chain of activity that happens from the foundations team through the kernel team and the security team and the desktop team. They provide for me 95% of what I require in order to do that last like 5% of work that makes Ubuntu Mate. And this is why the Ubuntu flavors are so polished and, of good quality.
Robust, yeah.
Yeah, because we benefit from all of that work. And where we may disagree on, our opinion about what Ubuntu or what the Linux desktop should be, we are unified by working on the same commons of software together, despite our differences in how that should be presented. And that's very powerful, and it's quite different from the way that a lot of other distributions are put together.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's interesting that people don't appreciate what goes on behind the scenes. And I know we've had feedback from our listeners, and I look forward to getting more feedback over the coming months while we're off the air or not. If you want to know more about the internals of, how stuff works, because personally, I find it super fascinating. Like, as soon as I discovered the focal changes mailing list, the changes mailing list that lists all the packages and they get updated, I was super fascinated. And it's a window to a bunch of developers who are just diligently working away in the background on free software. Take Ubuntu out of it. These are people who are just working on free software, making software available to people. And they're kind of the unsung heroes. All those people who are sat there keeping these packages up to date and keeping an eye on the upstream software and making sure it continues to build and making sure it continues to run and making sure it integrates with all the other things. I'm in constant admiration of these people who have, some of them have been doing this for many years, tens of years, to keep this stuff going. For those of us who just consume the Ubuntu desktop or Ubuntu server or Raspberry Pi or whatever it is, it's pretty amazing.
And all of that work that happens, either through, canonical people working on Ubuntu or Ubuntu contributors, that rigor is what defines that solid and reliable Ubuntu base that then enables other organizations like Linux Mint and Elementary and System 76 and Zorin to then innovate on top of what they can take as granted to be this reliable platform that they can build on top of.
Thanks for that. Let's move on. If you have any feedback for us, I'm sure Laura will be along a little bit later to tell you how to get in contact with us.
If you love the command line as much as we do, send us a command that will blow our minds, and we might even mention it on the show. Send your command line love to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And sure enough, she was right. Here comes a command line love. I hear there's something called auto jump. What is this thing?
Auto jump allows you to quickly navigate your file system. So it's in the archive. You can apt install auto jump. It doesn't automatically configure itself. You need to read the documentation. We'll have links in the show notes as to where you find that documentation and what you need to do. But once it's adequately configured, it will learn the context of where you are in your file system, and you can just type J and start partially typing a directory name and hit return, and it will take you to that place.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's like CD on crack.
It is CD on crack.
Or CD with AI.
Yeah, AIML. I believe that's the buzzword these days. Yeah, I'm sure there's a GPU involved somewhere.
Isn't this a bit like Fish and ZSH have kind of some intelligence to try and guess where you want to go next? Is this similar to that, but without having to change shell?
I suppose it is, because this is what I was thinking when I was looking at this. You know, everyone's saying, well, this is the advantage of this thing. And I was like, well, I've used the Fish shell for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, maybe longer. And I just type CD and the Fish shell automatically completes where I want to go to based on where I am. And it's like that. So in this case, you type J and start typing, and it auto completes where it thinks you want to go. But unlike the Fish shell and ZSH, you can coerce the way the algorithm works. So let's suppose you want to go to something that is some subdirectories deep. You can say J and then add multiple arguments, and those are alphanumeric filters to its algorithm. So you can say J A foo, and that will jump you to J audio foo, for example.
Okay. So you could just do single letter / single letter / single letter, and it will drop you like 3 levels deep, which are multi-word directory names. Okay, I get you. Huh.
Yeah. So that's something that those shells don't do. So if you want to supercharge some bash, then auto jump is for you. And it works with other shells as well, but you'll have to read the documentation.
Nice one. Thank you.
We love getting your feedback. If you've got a comment about something you hear on the show, why don't you drop us an email on show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And now it is indeed time for a little bit of feedback. It's calmed down a little bit after the distro hoppers are evil people feedback we got last time. First up, Neil McLaren emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
Just a quick email to ask if you would be in need of anyone to edit audio for the show. I've produced a lot of audio for my local community radio station and would be interested in helping out with post-production editing for the podcast. I've used Linux for a number of years, and I'm currently running Ubuntu Mate on both VMs and real hardware to fulfill almost all of my daily IT needs. A couple of things. What do you mean almost? And second of all, there's a very kind offer. But thankfully, Jupiter Broadcasting, in the guise of Linux Academy through Joe and Drew, are dealing with all of our post-production needs right now. So thank you for the offer, but we're covered on that regard.
If they get sick of us sending them gigantic FLAC files and sending them to them 2 days late, we'll be in contact. Don't you worry. Vince West emailed us.
I have been a listener for a few years now, and your show is the one I look forward to the most. What can I say? I like computers and operating systems, and I love the way you guys talk about them. I develop scientific applications, mostly on Windows at work and lately on Mac as well, with access to a Red Hat system running on our HPC systems, all of them running on a powerful modern hardware. That said, my favorite current computing environment is vanilla Ubuntu 1910 on my 2011 ThinkPad X220. Woohoo! He goes on to say, I'm sure Alan can relate.
Yes.
Yes, as can the BBC, apparently. I do sincerely hope you all come back for another season. Is Mark leaving the show for good? I was sad when Laura left the show and will be sad if Mark is gone for good as well. Please do come back. It makes my commute to work a much more pleasant experience for one day a week.
As is always the case, when it comes to the end of the season, as we have done for the last 12 years, we go away and have a break and have a think about things. Actually, we don't think about the podcast at all for at least a month. We have a good, long, solid break. And then we'll have a curry and have a chat. And maybe we'll come back. Maybe we won't. Maybe Mark will be available. Obviously, he's got a little baby to look after now.
I have met said baby.
Yeah, I have seen photos of you with said baby, like a politician holding a baby.
I got to meet Mark and Jocelyn and their daughter, and I got to have some exquisite baby cuddles a couple of weeks ago. I was in my element. I'm such a softie. I thoroughly enjoyed that afternoon. It was great.
Excellent. So yes, maybe we'll be back. Maybe not. Actually, now's a good point to ask if you have any feedback from the entire season on things we might want to change if we come back next year. Now's a good time to send that in, because contrary to popular opinion, we do read all of your emails and we love getting feedback, especially telling us how we could improve, whether it's changing segments, adding, removing things. You'll notice we haven't done a quiz since we were told nobody likes quizzes. But yeah, we've tweaked things over the years, and we'll continue to do that if listeners tell us.
Also, people say, "Oh, well, you always come back," and it isn't a foregone conclusion. There is actual deliberation, and you can appreciate Mark has now got a young family. That can factor into, whether or not we're able to come back next year or not. But your feedback is welcome, and it does, potentially motivate us and coerce us. So please do send your feedback. Let us know what you think. What do you like? What do you enjoy? What would you like to hear more of or less of? It all helps.
So that's the end of the Ubuntu podcast for this year.
Awesome. We're laying this on much thicker than we usually do.
Yeah, I know. I've had half a glass of wine. I thought, why not? Thank you all for listening. We all do appreciate all the feedback we get here in email or in Telegram or any one of the other ways. If you want to continue giving us feedback, you can send us emails, show@ubuntupodcast.org. We will carry on reading that. Apologies if we don't reply, but we do read them and we do discuss them as well. We also hang out in Telegram all day, every day, and we've just recently crested 1,000 people in the Ubuntu Podcast Telegram channel, which is quite bizarre. I don't think many of them are bots, but if you want to join us in there, you can find us at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram and chat to us over the Christmas period and into the new year and give us suggestions there as well.
And as we're leading into the Christmas period, the festive period, it's a time to think of other people. So do you want to talk about our work for charity?
So we've never asked for donations to the show. Like we are very lucky in that Bitfolk provide us with VPS hosting, and we are ever so grateful for them for hosting the audio files and the website for the show. And so if you're looking for a VPS, I strongly urge you to take a look at Bitfolk. And we're also lucky in that we don't have to edit the show. That gets done by our glorious friends over at Linux Academy and Jupiter Broadcasting. So thank you, Drew and Joe. But if you do feel the need to support us financially in some way, we'd actually ask that you donate to one of the charities listed on the website. If you go to ubuntupodcast.org/donate, you'll find each of the presenters has selected a charity. And now will be a good time, as Martin said. Now's a good time to throw a few pennies towards those organisations if you can. That would be much appreciated.
Yeah, so each of us have nominated a charity that we care about. You can pick your favourite presenter and the charity that they're advocating for and throw some money their way.
And finally, if you want to catch up on old episodes of Ubuntu Podcast, you'll find most of them on youtube.com/Ubuntu Podcast. They've all got the same music in, but for some reason, one or two of them have copyright strikes. We might try and deal with that, but the last time we tried to deal with it,
we got our channel banned.
Channel got completely deleted. So we're a bit cautious about that.
Season 6 is a bit patchy, but other than that, Season 6 is patchy for two reasons. One, copyright strikes, and also you had a Revo MP3 player eat an episode or something. Is that right?
Oh, that one, yeah.
Season 6, episode 30, the one that we'll never get back.
Also, we'll put a link in the show notes to the 8-bit versus stuff that myself and Martin are playing with. So if you're not sick of the sound of our voices, then you can also see our faces.
Yeah, get sick of our faces as well.
Oh, dear. Yes, thank you, Martin, for being around for the past how many years?
I think I've done 4 or 5. I've lost count. 4 or 5. 4, I think.
It's good fun. I do enjoy doing this.
I only do it because the listeners are so lovely.
Oh. Well, maybe see you next year.
Maybe.